TSX Composite Index and how it closed yesterday. It rallied by about 1/4 percentage point, finishing at 25,051 points. There's no trading in the U.S. today in respect for the funeral service of former President Jimmy Carter, which takes place today. Well, here's our top story. There are no signs of cooling rhetoric on either side of the Canada-U.S. border these days, just 10 days now before Donald Trump becomes the president of the United States for the second time. He's still vowing to hit Canada with tariffs of 25% as soon as he takes office. And Canadian officials are beginning to talk tough as well. Yesterday, in an extensive interview with Bloomberg Canada's Brian Platt, Federal Energy Minister Jonathan Wilkinson said nothing is off the table in terms of potential Canadian responses to U.S. tariffs. Is a trade war just days away? It's something that's on the mind of Canadian investors. Let's talk about it with our featured guest of the morning. He's Allan Small of Allan Small Financial Group at IA Private Wealth. Allan, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You've said in some notes that I've read that your clients are asking you this very question. Should we be concerned about the possibility of a trade war? Should we be lightening up on some positions in advance? What are you telling them?
Yeah, it's interesting because, over the holidays, I received a number of emails. Should we be lightening up on our positions? Should we be taking some money off the table, especially in more volatile positions? People are nervous. People are concerned. Obviously, the tariff talk out of the U.S. continues to happen. I personally, and I guess we all have opinions on the former president, president-elect, soon-to-be president, whatever you want to call President Trump. He tends to talk tough and sometimes, or most of the time, actually scale back. So it'll be very interesting to see if he does scale back when he gets into office. And maybe this is initial talking tough and then scaling back, because we know that tariffs will hurt the United States as well, not just us, but will he hurt his own countries, all those border states that do a lot of business with Ontario, with the rest of Canada? That is a big question that is unanswered right now. And unfortunately for us, we don't really have much in the way of Parliament right now to be able to take up the discussions. I think that plays a factor as well. You've heard, the premiers coming up, especially our premier, Premier Ford here in Ontario, kind of go on a number of U.S. Media, making a lot of appearances, BNN, Fox. I think we can glean a lot from what he is saying and how the premiers feel. So we'll have to see how it goes in the next couple of weeks.
Tell us more about the kind of questions and worries that are on your clients' minds.
Well, I think for me, I think the worries stem from emotion, right? I think a lot of individual investors, they let sometimes their emotions get the better of them. So if they're more Democratic versus Republican, if they're not a big fan of the way President Trump behaves, talks, speaks, they at times tend to let that affect their investment judgment, which you can't do, right? You have to take emotion out of investing. And it's very difficult to do that, especially if you're managing your own money. I think obviously having some sort of advisor helps do that. But I think a lot of political views get involved when it comes to managing money. And I think that is really the crux or the back of why these questions are being asked. And then, of course, if you're not in agreement with the way President Trump handles his affairs, speaks, talks, acts, you kind of take that over to the investment side of things. So I think, to me, I'm not so sure that what people are asking, investors are asking, is fundamental analysis will tell you it's not true, right? Under the previous term by the president, markets went higher until COVID hit. Markets went higher in November when he was elected. So there are a lot of pros, right? He's pro-business. He wants to cut taxes. He wants to deregulate, cut red tape. And he looks at the stock market as a barometer for his success, right? Yeah. He will say, well, when I was president, the stock market went up so much. So will he enact or put through policy to hurt the stock market? I don't think so. And so maybe in the short term, you'll see market volatility. But over his 4 years, I think he's going to look for the market to go higher. He's going to put things in place to see that market go higher. So I think that there is cause to not only, yes, be concerned, but also you could see markets move higher, and obviously that would help investors.
What's your view of the Canadian stock market in this potential trade war climate? Yesterday, we spoke with the chief economist of Deloitte, and she said that Deloitte's call is that if U.S. tariffs are imposed and, importantly, if Canada responds with tariffs of its own, she believes those are the conditions that would push Canada into a recession. a full-blown trade war with tariffs on both sides would be economically negative enough to push the Canadian economy into recession. If she's correct, what would you think be the consequences for Canadian stocks of companies that do most of their business right here in Canada?
Very bad, obviously. When you look at our economy growing just over 1%, it's not going to take much to push us into some sort of recession, mild recession. If there is a trade war, if businesses are finding it difficult to export to the U.S., keep in mind, we export about 70% of what we pull out of the ground, what we build here to the United States. And if it becomes a lot more difficult to do that, there's going to be a lot of businesses affected. That trade, obviously, on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Our banks will be affected because the overall economy will be affected. And we know banking is our largest sector, and it is the bloodline for our economy. So obviously not a good thing. Any kind of trade war with the U.S. would not be good. Our largest trading partner coming down hard on us, and we reciprocating and fighting back. That's not an environment we want to see here. Obviously, the U.S. will be able to weather that a lot better than us. But again, they'll be hit hard as well. So that's something I don't think President Trump will want. There'll be some negotiations. There'll be some deal done. I'm confident of that. The question is when and what will that deal look like?
That's all.